A few days ago, my husband and I were preparing to leave for a family vacation with his relatives. They have an annual tradition of traveling together, where everyone gathers, picks a destination, and spends a week away from everything. My husband, 30M, and I, 30F, had just gotten married, but we'd been together for 3 years before that. I was really excited to join in on this trip for the first time. The year before, when we were engaged, he had invited me to go, but his family hadn't formally asked me, so I felt awkward and declined. This time, my mother-in-law, Sandra, personally invited me, which I thought was a big step. I'd always felt that Sandra wasn't fond of me. She'd never been openly hostile, but she wasn't warm either. Her behavior toward me seemed colder than toward others, and I could sense a distance. I think the shift happened when my husband moved out of their house to live with me after we started dating. Since then, she'd seemed distant and less welcoming. I suspected that part of her animosity stemmed from the fact that I was the reason her son chose to leave his family home. She had always wanted her children to live nearby or even under the same roof, and it was clear that she didn't approve of me being the reason her son wasn't there anymore. I've always been independent and had been living on my own since college, so living with his family, or even near them, wasn't something I ever considered. While my husband had considered getting his own place, Sandra made it clear that her ideal situation was for everyone to live in close proximity, so they could gather frequently. His older sister had moved out but only down the street, and that arrangement seemed to be exactly what Sandra wanted for her children, so I understood that she likely felt my wish for privacy was unreasonable. But my husband and I agreed that our current living situation suited us, and he preferred the privacy after growing up with none. I always did my best to be friendly and integrate into the family, despite the chilly reception. Still, I never fully felt accepted. Then, just before our trip, Sandra confirmed that I wasn't considered family yet. We had been planning this vacation for months, and I had helped with the details, assuming it would be like every other family trip, with his parents covering the costs. I didn't mind paying for myself, but I had been told by my husband that the family would take care of everything, so I didn't expect to be asked to pay. Then, right before the trip, Sandra called me over. She said she wanted to discuss some details, so I went over alone since my husband was wrapping up work. What I didn't expect was that she would tell me I needed to cover my own expenses for the trip. She explained that it was a family vacation and that she and her husband always paid for everyone, but since she didn't consider me family yet, I was expected to pay my own way. She added that she didn't want me to make a fuss, as it might spoil the mood, but she felt that since we didn't visit as much as the rest of the family, I wasn't close enough to be considered part of it. I was devastated. I'd worked hard to be part of their family, despite the tension with Sandra. I'd been led to believe that this invitation and the vacation planning meant I was finally accepted. Instead, I was reminded that I wasn't really family, after all. Sandra could have been honest with me from the start, and I would have understood, but dropping this bombshell right before we were set to leave for the vacation felt unnecessarily cruel. I tried to hide my hurt, forcing myself to act as though I was fine with the situation, even though inside, I was furious. I didn't want to react impulsively, so I decided to keep my feelings in check until I had a chance to talk things through with my husband. I told her that I understood, and I would, of course, pay for myself. She seemed taken aback by my calm response, and I could tell it wasn't the reaction she was hoping for, but I didn't stay to discuss it further. I left as quickly as I could. The moment I got home, I struggled to hold back my tears, but I managed to keep my composure. When my husband saw I was upset and asked what had happened, I tried to explain everything. He was furious when he heard what his mother had done and immediately said he wanted to cancel the vacation. He wasn't going to spend another minute with her after the way she treated me. I told him that I'd suspected for a long time that Sandra didn't like me, but I had brushed it off as a paranoid feeling. Now, though, it seemed clear to me that my suspicions had been right all along. Her behavior had changed toward me the moment he moved out to live with me, and I could feel the coldness ever since. The things she said about me not being close enough to be considered family, just because I didn't visit as often, only confirmed it. My husband agreed, saying that it was possible because Sandra had always been very family-oriented, and she was upset when he first told her he was moving out to live with me. He knew how much she wanted her children to live close by, and even though she hadn't shown it at the time, she probably blamed me for his decision and had been holding a grudge ever since. Still, he acknowledged that none of this excused her behavior toward me, especially the way she tried to embarrass me before the trip. We spent a long time discussing how to handle the situation. My husband was ready to confront her, but I didn't just want to cancel the vacation or give her a piece of my mind. I wanted her to feel as awful as I did. So, we made a plan. The next day, we would go to the airport, just like we had planned to, but instead of joining them on the family trip, we would take a flight to somewhere else and leave them behind. It was the only way I could think of to make her truly feel the hurt she had caused me. It was the perfect plan. Sandra and the rest of the family wouldn't have a clue until it was too late. So, we followed through. The next day, we met the family at the airport as planned, but then we excused ourselves, saying we wanted to get some photos. While they were distracted chatting among themselves, we walked over to the counter and bought 2 tickets for the earliest flight we could find, straight to San Francisco. It was a spontaneous choice, but we were happy with it. Instead of the planned Miami trip, this gave us a chance to enjoy the vacation, just the 2 of us, away from anyone who had made me feel unwelcome. Once we were on the flight, Sandra's family quickly realized something was wrong. They tried calling and texting, but we ignored them. Airports are big places, and they couldn't find us in time to stop us. We arrived at our destination without a hitch, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. Once we had settled in, my husband sent the truth in a family group chat. He told them about Sandra's comments and explained that since the vacation was meant for family, and I wasn't considered part of the family, we had decided to stay out of it altogether, out of respect for her wishes. We expected Sandra to be angry, maybe even my father-in-law, but what we didn't anticipate was the entire family turning on us. Everyone was upset that we had abandoned them at the airport, worrying them unnecessarily. However, they still took their flight, so it didn't make sense why they were so upset. They accused us of being irresponsible and selfish for disappearing without a word, and they especially laid into me. They argued that Sandra's comments didn't justify our drastic reaction and said I should have offered to pay for myself instead of assuming they'd cover my expenses. They also criticized me for not making more effort to connect with the family, pointing out that I hadn't joined their weekly family dinners or kept in touch regularly. It felt like they were blaming me for everything, which really hurt. I've always earned my own money, and the idea that I was being selfish or treating them like an ATM was offensive. I never expected anyone to pay for me, and I resented them for implying that. I told them their expectations were completely unrealistic. They claimed they had family dinners every week, but in reality, it was more like every other day. My husband and I had always tried to balance visits with our need for personal space, and we made an effort to visit at least once every couple of weeks, even before we got married. I reminded them of how hard I'd tried to integrate into their family, and if that still wasn't enough for them, then there wasn't much we could do. They didn't like hearing this and accused us of ruining their vacation with our selfishness, calling us immature. One thing I had to make clear was that it wasn't just me who thought the constant family gatherings were excessive. No family needs to meet up every other day for dinner. It's almost like living together. It seemed pointless for us to live apart if we were going to see them constantly. This wasn't just my decision. My husband and I both wanted space, which is why we decided to live a little further away and limit visits to once a week. It wasn't a choice I made alone, and it felt unfair that his entire family was putting the blame on me. And for the record, it wasn't just them. Getting criticized by strangers online didn't help either. The reality is, my husband was just as involved in the decision as I was. Neither of us wanted to be around his family every other day, and their accusation that I expected them to pay for my plane ticket and take me on vacation without making any effort to become part of the family is completely untrue. I never expected them to cover my expenses. Had they told me up front that I would be responsible for paying my own way, I would have either agreed to it or decided not to go. But for Sandra to pull me aside right before the vacation and tell me that they wouldn't cover my costs because I wasn't family, well, that felt like a deliberate attempt to make me feel bad. I wouldn't have had an issue paying for myself. I don't have unreasonable expectations. And yes, I've made an effort to get along with them. Their claim that I didn't try hard enough to become part of the family just because I didn't visit their house every other day is absurd. I did my best to integrate, and I always thought Sandra was the only one who disapproved of me. But now I realize that none of them like me as much as I thought, and that's really disappointing. Update 1. So, my husband and I are still on vacation, and his family is being a total pain. I've come to realize that their anger over me not wanting to practically live with them is completely unreasonable. I'm not going to sacrifice my personal space and privacy just to please them. If they want to be mad at me, that's their choice, but they need to stop making a point of letting us know. They've made it clear, and honestly, we don't care. They need to accept that. Just yesterday, they sent me a message because they couldn't reach my husband, telling me that whatever I was trying to do to break up their family would fail, because their relationships are too strong for someone like me to come between. I thought it was overly dramatic to make such a big deal out of it, because as far as I'm concerned, I didn't do anything to break them apart. They insulted me, and that's why we decided to distance ourselves. Once again, they don't seem to understand that my husband has his own agency and can make his own decisions. If we chose to go on a separate vacation, it was because he wanted the same thing. It might be hard for them to accept, but that's the truth. I texted Sandra back, letting her know that my husband didn't want to spend his vacation with them, and that we had both agreed on this decision. I pointed out how ridiculous it was for them to only blame me. I also made it clear that if they had treated me decently in the first place, my husband might not have felt the need to distance himself. If they wanted to place blame on someone, they should look at themselves. Sandra had been the one sending me the texts, but I knew the rest of the family shared her sentiment. They all seemed to think I was somehow controlling my husband, forcing him to break away from them. After I said everything I needed to, I didn't want to engage with her or anyone else from his family, so I blocked them all on every platform and decided to focus on my vacation. I'd taken time off for this, and I wasn't going to let them ruin it. I told my husband about the text, and he told me to ignore it. There was no point in trying to explain ourselves to them. They were too caught up in their drama to realize that we simply wanted to live a normal life, and that wasn't possible with them constantly around. They were being overly dramatic about the whole situation. Update 2. We got back from our vacation last night, and it was a great few days, but now that it's over, it's back to work. We were hoping for a peaceful week, but that didn't last long because his family came back today. 2. We hadn't had any contact with them while we were away. Both of us had blocked them on social media and their phone numbers, so they had no way of reaching us. It was peaceful being away from all the drama, but now that we're back, they wasted no time trying to reach out and stir things up again. We had just come home after a long day at work when we heard someone ringing the doorbell repeatedly. We both knew it had to be someone from his family, and sure enough, it was Sandra standing there. We didn't want her inside, so we told her we were tired and not in the mood to talk, but she pushed past us and came into the living room anyway. I was frustrated, so I told her to leave my house because her behavior before the vacation was completely unacceptable. I had nothing to say to her, and I didn't want to listen to her either because I knew she'd just find a way to blame me for everything. But instead of listening to me, she told me to shut up and said she wasn't there to talk to me. She was there to talk to her son, so I needed to stay quiet. Her tone annoyed me, so I told her she couldn't speak to me like that in my own home. That was all it took to set her off. She started yelling at me, accusing me of trying to isolate her son and undermine her in front of him so he'd lose respect for her. She claimed she had always known this day would come because I was a homewrecker who couldn't stand seeing my husband close to his family. She said I wanted to control him and couldn't stand him having a connection with them. She called me a psycho and said she was there to rescue her son before it was too late. She said I had no right to interfere because I wasn't family. I snapped back that I was actually glad I wasn't part of her family, because it seemed like she was trying to run a cult, not have a family. That set her off even more, and she literally lunged at me. Before I knew it, she had grabbed my hair and was physically attacking me. My husband quickly pulled her off me and shoved her out of the house. She kept screaming insults at me even as she was being thrown out, and I was really shaken up. We waited for a moment to calm down before calling the cops to have her removed from our property. Even after my husband had pushed her out, she stayed in the yard, yelling that I was breaking up her family but that she wasn't going to let it happen. It wasn't until the police showed up that she stopped screaming. Then she started begging us not to press charges. But we'd already made up our minds. She had attacked me, and I couldn't just let it go. If I did, she might do it again. So, we pressed charges. She wasn't seriously hurt, so they'll probably go easy on her. But at least it's on record now. She was taken away in tears, which was surreal, considering just moments before, she'd been yelling at us and threatening us. Afterward, my husband and I started looking for a lawyer so we could get a restraining order against her. We didn't trust her, and I wasn't going to risk it. We'd also been thinking about moving for a while because the location wasn't ideal for either of us. Now, we were even more determined to find a place that was convenient for both of us, somewhere we could escape the drama and make sure she couldn't get to us again. It's been a few hours since she was arrested, and no one from his family has tried to contact us yet, but I'm sure they'll be upset. they might even disown him. But honestly, it's worth it. Sandra needed to be put in her place, and I have no regrets about calling her out and having her arrested for attacking me. She totally deserved it. Update 3. We got the restraining order against Sandra, and it's been a few days since then. The last couple of weeks have been a whirlwind. Between looking for a new house and dealing with the aftermath, I've barely had time to update, but now, I finally have a moment. First, Sandra got off easy. She only received community service because I wasn't seriously hurt, but my husband's family has been making a big deal out of it, portraying her as the victim in a situation she created. They've been telling everyone that I provoked Sandra, and that's why she attacked me. They're saying this was all planned, that we wanted to provoke her so we'd have an excuse to press charges. Somehow, I'm the bad guy, even though I was the one who got attacked. It doesn't make sense, but that's their narrative. Thankfully, not many people are buying it. Most are on our side, and it seems like my husband's family is starting to cut ties with us. In a way, it's true what I said about Sandra wanting to run a cult instead of a family. Her expectations were unrealistic, and now I can see just how unhealthy it all was. I'm glad I told her to her face that she was being crazy, and if I ever have the chance again, I'd say it again, even if it meant another confrontation, because it would be worth it. The good news is, with the restraining order in place and the new house we just moved into, Sandra and the rest of the family have no idea where we are now. We've blocked them on everything, so they can't get to us. My husband is more relieved than I am. He used to say that being around his family felt suffocating, and I can see why. I'd feel the same way if my parents treated me like that and gave me no personal space. I guess I'm lucky that my family doesn't act like that, and I feel fortunate to have my husband's support.